good afternoon. You know it's really me because I'm late. So that's my business card right there. You know, family comes first, so I had to feed the family and then I had to clean up. Okay, so last time we did not really get to the questions that were coming in on the computer. I mostly focused on the ones that came in ahead of time on the blog. Well, this time I wanted to only take questions from people who couldn't be here for the live. And I have the capability for you guys to send questions in by text or in the live stream if I get my computer set up here. I guess I didn't pull out my laptop yet. So if you're doing the live stream, wait until my laptop is set up. But I have a number here that you can text to. Now, let me just say this is not my cell phone. You cannot call this number. If you do, I'm guessing there's just a message that says you can't get a hold of me. So this will not work any other time. It's just set up for this. It is 480-352-0616. Again, that's 480-352-0616. And I guess when you text to that number, it'll actually pop up here on my tablet. So if you want to text your questions in, that is your number, 480-352-0616. Maybe I can ask my husband at home to add that number to the description in the video, and then he can, honey, if you're hearing me say this, please add it to the description when you get a chance. 480-352-0616. I'm going to grab my laptop here in just a moment and get that set up. Until then, let me just grab a couple of questions that came in on the blog. The first one is from Diana. I would love to know what supplements you take. I take a prenatal. I try to remember to take it at least 3 to 5 times a week, ideally daily. People often ask me, should I take a prenatal? I've heard that they leach the body of minerals and vitamins. I'm a firm believer in taking the vitamins. Just make sure it's a good one. The one I use is the raw prenatal. And I forget the brand. I guess I'd have to look it up. But it's basically a whole foods based. And beyond that, I also like to take a liquid calcium magnesium supplement. I take the fermented cod liver oil, and as necessary, I take Floridex iron supplement. I will do a blog post just specifically on what supplements I do take daily. What lacto-fermented foods do I make on a constant basis? At this point, only the sourdough and the kombucha. I used to make ginger ale all the time also, so I would like to get back into that. Oh yeah, and kefir also, so 3 things there. Are there any things other than supplements and lacto-fermented foods that I do to prepare my body for upcoming pregnancies? Well, if you've struggled with morning sickness, I would encourage you to do the H. pylori regimen that I recommended in my blog post on morning sickness that you can find on my blog. Just search for morning sickness and it will come right up. And beyond that, you know, one thing that I'm really excited about that I think is going to be revolutionary, and I've just discovered it since my most recent pregnancy, is a substance called cocolorin. And I learned about this from Pink Stork Solutions. And it is a substance that has been found to be very effective in combating H. pylori. So with that in mind, I have not been pregnant since I was sent some cocolorin by Pink Stork Solutions, but my family had a stomach bug going around and I was kind of coming down with it. I woke up just like sick. And when I did, I tried the cocolorin and it fixed me up like after taking it once. So I'm really excited about that. There's a lot of testimonials I know on the Pink Stork website regarding the cocolorin, and I'm very excited to try that with my next pregnancy. Other than that, yes, just ahead of time, I think I will be focusing on treating the H. pylori aggressively with things like the turmeric and things like that. And the last question on here, love to hear about my pre-salvation worldview, beliefs, mindsets, ideas about God. I'm just going to make that very quick just because there's other questions waiting, but I was raised Catholic and I went to church, the Catholic Church, and I really had a desire, I really wanted to live for God, and I always remember it stood out in my mind a verse that my mother had often said to me, or that I'd heard, about Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. And I believed it, but I didn't know and I didn't understand how I could apply that to myself. Like, so you're the way and you're the door, but like, how do you go through that? Like, how does that practically play out? So I really did. And when I was young, I was probably 8 and 10 years old, I always prayed that God would reveal himself to me. And I prayed that, you know, if he would show me, I would go and tell other people about it. And by the time I got to about 12 or 14, I really had given up on that idea. At this point, I'd become an agnostic. I knew that the Catholic Church did not have biblical truth. I knew that much, but I thought the Catholic Church was pretty much the only Christian religion out there. From what I'd seen and I'd been exposed to, I thought, well, if the Catholic Church isn't true, just Christianity isn't true. And I didn't really take an interest in Islam or Buddhism or any of those other religions. So I just thought, well, I guess there just really isn't a God, or if there is, I don't really have time to look into it. I became an agnostic. So my worldviews, of course, were shaped by humanism and worldliness. And I was kind of like a left-wing feminist. I don't know if that's hard to imagine now, but I really was. And I'm just really thankful that my eyes were open. And when I did get saved, it was really like the Bible says. It was like the blind receiving sight, like the scales falling from my eyes. I think it is great when children get saved young. I think it is wonderful. And if I could, I of course wish I had been saved as a child and heard the gospel then. The only one good thing that has come from me getting saved as an adult is that there was such a night and day difference, and it was really just so powerful. It was just, you know, and I'm not saying everybody who gets saved as an adult will have this. It was just because when I got saved, I was also immediately immersed in the Bible and in church and the things of God. So I was able to grow very fast, and it really was a night and day difference. So that's the first question that I took from the blog. I think I've heard this tablet chirp. Let's see if this is working. It says here, do you accept what the culture has decided in regards to profanity? Does it affect you in what you allow your family to watch and read? For example, if a book or movie contains profanity. Okay, so profanity. If a book or movie contains profanity. You know, the Bible doesn't specifically talk about profanity. The word profanity comes from the word profane, which is, you know, things that are not holy. It's things that are defiling. So I think that there are words that are profane? Of course I do. Now, in our culture, with just this question specifically, there are many words that are considered profane that I do not consider profane, simply because they are Bible words or Bible concepts. So, of course, if possible, I try to teach my kids not to say words that others might find offensive, while making sure that it's not bad in and of itself. For example, the word bastard. The word bastard is, I'm guessing, a profanity to some people. I think it gets bleeped out on TV. I know that, you know, people use it as a quote-unquote curse word. I don't think it's an offensive word. I think if people use it more, maybe we would have less of them, because people would realize that it's a stigma and it's something negative that we should avoid. And then, of course, there's the other thing of cursing. When the Bible talks about cursing, it is not talking about using profane and vain language. It's talking about actually pronouncing a curse on someone, like, I wish you would die. And again, there is a time for that. Sometimes, you know, I mean, you think about the imprecatory Psalms of David, where he is wishing ill on certain people and on the enemies of the Lord. So rarely there is a time for that. So let's see here again. Let's go on to the next question. What books do I recommend for little ones other than the KJV Bible? I'm a young wife and expecting my first baby. Does your family have any favorite storybooks? I know how important reading is. Well, first of all, I would really recommend looking up reading lists online. Pinterest has tons of great reading lists by age, simply because there's so many books to choose from. So you could look up, you know, for Christians, reading lists for Christians, and, you know, be discerning. Just some of our favorites when our kids were young, because we're talking about you're expecting. Congratulations. So board books, you know, there's tons of board books out there that our kids like. Our kids like the Dr. Seuss books, and I know Solomon loved the book A Fly Went By. I've read that book probably 200 times at least. I mean, I can still quote the book 13 years later. I can still quote the whole thing. And yeah, they like that. And then when they get older and you can do story time, chapter books, our kids have really loved the Little House series and other series. In fact, there is a blog post, recommended books for family read aloud. And if you search that on my blog, you will find that. And we have some great resources, and readers commented with their favorite resources. But I would say if you look on Pinterest, you will find many, many great ideas by age. In fact, if you go to my Pinterest, I think it's my screen name on there is Z.S. Anderson, Janderson. If you go on there, I have a board on there that's specifically for reading, homeschooling / reading, and you will find it on there. Some ideas of what we do. Pardon me. All right, let me go on to the computer here for a second. All right, Rebecca Loader wants to know, is there Christian material for Bible-based puberty / sex ed for homeschooling? What is appropriate and what is not? I think that's a really good question. And in our family, the way we have handled it is that, of course our children pick up bits and pieces here simply because there's always a new baby coming along, and they can see that there's, we change diapers. I remember when Anna was a baby and she saw me change Stephen's diaper, she was like, what's that? And I think that's a pretty common reaction that children have. Of course, we have animals. That teaches them that there's a difference between the genders. That's really rudimentary, but in our society, it seems like a lot of people don't know that there's a difference between male and female, and they are confused about their own gender. Now, beyond just the basics, I've always had a policy of if my kids ask, I try not to act shocked about anything. That's really important so that your kids will know that they can come to you. You want to send them a message of, nothing you tell me will shock me. Nothing shocks me at all. You can come to me with it and I will be able to handle it. So when they ask, don't act shocked. Just answer their questions in an age-appropriate manner. If they ask where babies come from, you can, depending on the age, verbalize that. Use the words you want them to use to refer to their private parts. And at some point, of course, that is not going to do it. And in our family, so far, my husband has had the talk with just Solomon. And I anticipate in the future he will do the boys and I will do the girls. And I would say it depends on the individual, but I would say probably around 12, 13-ish is a good age. It just depends on the maturity level. Just give them an opportunity to ask questions and explain to them, and really impress upon them the importance of not being a fornicator before they really fully hit puberty, to where they really are just overtaken with those desires that are godly desires in the concept of marriage, but we want to hold off on that until we're married. So I think that that's a good age for mom or dad to take the child aside, just one-on-one, explain it to them, ask them if they have questions. And from what I heard, I wasn't there for the conversation, it went very well, and answered a few questions that he had, and leave the communication lines open of if you have any more questions, feel free to come to me. And I think that that worked out really well. So that's been our experience, which is limited. I'm not aware of any books specifically. There are some in the What to Expect series, or, just books for kids about younger siblings when mom is pregnant. Sometimes when they read those have some information in them that, if children read them, will just very delicately expose them to some of the reproductive aspects of it all. Somebody's asking, what's the good news? The good news is the gospel. If you ask me if we have good news to share regarding a pregnancy, we do not. Okay, here's a question. I recently lost my baby at 21 weeks gestation. I know you were pregnant with twins and lost one. While I know God's promise, I'm still grieving. What are some ways you dealt with your grief after losing Boaz's twin? Thank you. That's from Ellie. Well, Ellie, first of all, I'm very sorry. And 21 weeks is, it's hard at any stage, but it gets harder in my mind the farther along you are, because you deliver the child and it's developed, and, it's very tangible and very visible. So I'm really sorry for your loss. I think everybody deals with grief very differently. And I think that you just have to allow yourself to grieve the way that it feels right to you. If that's not wanting to talk to anybody about it, then, you know, that's probably the way you should go. If it's, I really want to talk to somebody about it, my husband doesn't want to listen, or I don't have anybody to talk to, maybe find an online community. There's a lot of them online. Or you find, you know, some other relative that you can talk to. And just realize there's no right or wrong way to grieve. There's not really a timeline that you have to put on yourself, like I should be over this by now. You know, the last thing you want to do is pile guilt on top of it. Just allow yourself to grieve. And I think the one thing that's really important to remember is that there is definitely a danger of it affecting your marriage negatively. And that's the one thing you want to be aware of. And I think the reason why it could, and I've just seen this with I am in a few twin loss communities on Facebook, and the bitterness that some people experience stems from the fact that the communication between the spouse is broken down because they grieve differently, because they might not want to talk about it or the other one does. When those lines of communication shut down, there's a danger of just drifting apart in general. And it can often, sadly, the loss of a child, statistically, I forget the exact statistics, but you're very likely to suffer major harm to your marriage as a result. So that's the only area that I would say you want to beware, be careful, keep those lines open. If you can't talk about that, you know, just connect in other areas and try to give each other a lot of grace in the arena of grieving, because it is so individual and so different for everybody. And just realize that it will get better over time, and those wounds do heal. And I think that really the greatest factor in that is just the fact that we're saved, that we know we will see the child again. It wasn't a waste, it was God's plan, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't something that you did wrong. It was simply what God had. And that will help you cope with it. And that really gave me peace to know, you know, we did what we could, and this is what God had decided, you know. And I just, I can't really say that I've really struggled with it. Am I still sad? I'm still sad about it often, but it's not a sadness where I just can't cope. It's just, you know, it's kind of like you miss somebody that you can't see, but you're not just pining away. I hope that makes sense, and I hope I answered that appropriately. What is my view on revivals and singing specials? You know, to each his own. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. We don't do them personally, but I think that there's a lot of liberty within, you know, God has so many rules, and I don't really feel the need to add our own rules. If people like to do that, I'm fine with it. Not my preference, but I don't think it's wrong. Thank you for the compliment here that we've been a blessing. I'm glad to hear that. Do I sometimes wish I still lived in Europe? What do I miss most about it? I miss the food. I miss the little small town feel. You know, everything in America is kind of, everything is like a corporate thing, and it's franchises. You can go from here all the way to the East Coast and visit 30 cities along the way, and they all kind of look the same. You're going to find the same big box stores and department stores. A lot less individuality there. So I miss that. Did I mention I miss the food? I miss the landscape. Of course, it's very different. I miss being able to travel by train and it not be like, you know, dangerous or unsafe or trampy. Like over there, it's kind of like the old world feel. I really just miss that old world feel. Do I wish I lived there? I'd like to live there probably 2-3 months out of the year. No, I would not want to live there full-time or long-term. For one, because we homeschool our children, and that's a big aspect to us. But no, I can only stand to be there for a little while, just because culturally we're so different as Christians here. And over there, it's really so different because there are far fewer Christians over there. So it's kind of nice to go there for a while, and then I'd like to come back here. If I could live either here or there, and it were entirely up to me, I would still choose to live here. I really do love it here. Okay, what's the gospel mean? Good news. Yes, the gospel means good news. Glad tidings of great joy, peace to all men. Let's see here. What's my opinion on the RhoGAM shot for Rh negative mothers? That is entirely over my head. I'm sorry, I cannot give any advice on that simply because I am Rh positive. I have been asked that before, so I really should look into it because this question seems to be coming up. I'm afraid I cannot give advice on that though, just because I've never looked into it. If somebody else here in the feed has any input on that from a Christian perspective, please feel free to share. That was a question of Paul Niven, so you can tag him in that. What kind of counter is that? I'm not sure about the counter. I'm guessing maybe the stat counter in the back. Do I have any favorite cookbooks for healthy organic cooking? You know, I really just cook just regular recipes with organic ingredients. I can't really say that I use a special organic cookbook. I just like to use whole foods recipes, meaning they're whole foods based, not the store whole foods, but like, you know, with wholesome ingredients the way God made them. And I just make regular recipes. Last night, for instance, I made homemade KFC with mashed potatoes and gravy on the side. So, you know, you just find a copycat recipe online. I used organic chicken thighs, boneless, skinless. I breaded them in my own raw milk, my own backyard eggs, and my own homemade sourdough breadcrumbs. And then I made mashed potatoes with homemade gravy that I made the broth myself from bones. So it's really just what everybody else is eating. I just kind of tweak it to make it as homemade as possible with all the individual ingredients. And also just, you know, use whole foods ingredients. Don't use Frankenfoods. I can't say that there's a specific cookbook. There's Hebrew writing on the wall behind me. How do I feel about the Jewish religion? I believe this is Genesis 1 through 4 on the wall here. I think my husband did an awesome job. He did that himself. How do I feel about the Jewish religion? Well, I think it's a false religion, of course. They do not believe in Jesus Christ as a Messiah. And he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ is Antichrist. So I think it's a religion of Antichrist. Of course, somebody's going to call me an anti-Semite for that. And that's par for the course. I think it's a lot more anti-Semitic to let an entire religion go to hell because you want to go around and lie and say that they're already going to heaven when they're not, because nobody is going to heaven that denies that Jesus Christ is the Lord. My husband needs to go through here and delete the freaks and freaks comments. Unfortunately, they're some religiously, like they're as zealous as they should be about God for just wicked things. So someday soon, God will destroy them. There is a question about English isn't my native language. Am I Jewish? I'm not Jewish. I'm half Hungarian, half German, and English is my third language. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the paper that came in online, and then I will take a few more from the tablet, and then I will go back to the live feed here. So when I do, I will let you know. Rivka had a question about my children not watching TV, conservative about clothing and dancing. Do I expose my child to any type of dance performances, such as ballet or ballroom? I ask because I've always felt that our bodies can be used to express beauty and the wonder of God's design as well as our voices. Good question. And I think in Christian circles, or fundamentalist Christian circles, dancing is often regarded as something wrong. The Bible, on the other hand, of course, speaks about praising God in dancing and songs. So I think that it can be wrong. I wouldn't suggest you slow dance with somebody outside besides your spouse or to wicked, ungodly music. Personally, ballet, well, I think I would enjoy ballet if it weren't for all the homo guys in it, which I think like the vast majority of them are, so I wouldn't be into ballet just for that reason. I really like ballroom dancing. I've actually wanted to take it up as a hobby with my husband, of course. I don't think there's anything inappropriate or suggestive about it. It's not any more personal than, like, say, us kissing in public, which I think is fine. And it's funny because I actually was talking to him about wanting to do ballroom dancing classes, and one of our kids was sitting on the floor on their bottom and just spinning. And I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm bottom dancing. You said you wanted to do bottom dancing. So that's ballroom dancing. But no, I think it can be good or bad. It just depends on who's doing it, how they're doing it, and the environment. I don't think it's inherently evil to dance, no. Here's a funny question. For those Baptist pastors that believe reprobate sodomites can be saved and come to church and fellowship with believers, what if they were to ask themselves this question? If they allowed sodomites or even a married sodomite couple into their church, how then could they rebuke fornication and adultery and even kick out fornicators and adulterers? Well, that's easy. They don't. They don't kick them out. They don't even rebuke it from the pulpit. They don't. And that's an easy answer right there. Okay, if you want to text your question in, please text it to 480-352-0616. That's 480-352-0616. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the tablet and then I will go back to the live stream. How often do I read books outside of the Bible? What books do you like to read? Any recommendations? I would like to say daily. I probably don't have time every day, but at any given time I have about 20 books on the coffee table that I'm slowly working myself through. I read nonfiction exclusively, except for the fiction that I read to the children. I'm not saying that all fiction is wrong. I'm sure there's a lot of great books out there. I do like to read classics every once in a while. I just find the contemporary fiction books so shallow and pointless. I usually, because my reading time is very limited, I prefer to read nonfiction that I actually find informational. I like to read books on health, of course, just very practical books. I even, just like to read cookbooks, books on history, books on medical issues, just all sorts of things. I'm trying to think. I really enjoy reading books about North Korea. That's kind of a hobby horse of mine, studying North Korea, things like that nature. And yeah, I would like to say daily, but it probably doesn't happen every day. I was wondering whether I sometimes miss Europe. What do I find weirdest about the US? I do miss Europe. I answered that a little earlier. What do I find weirdest about the US? I've wanted to make a blog post about that, and I just haven't had time. One of the weirdest things about the US is the bathrooms. It sounds like a really strange thing. Just the idea that you go into a public restroom and there's a gap on either side of the stall this big, that is bizarre. I have 13 years later, 15 years later, I'm still not used to that. So if at all I can avoid it, I never go to the bathroom in public because there's no privacy in stalls here. Very weird. There's some other things. I know I've wanted to do a blog post on that. I can't think off the top of my head. But yeah, the bathrooms is really a biggie. What steps do I take or will I take to prevent my children from being tempted to use drugs? I think the biggest step is identifying the danger and telling them about it. And I think that's really the secret to just about anything in life. That if people are prepared and they know what to expect, they are much better prepared to deal with the problem. And the book of Proverbs really is filled with advice to young men or young people in general, telling them what to look out for, what to beware of, the flattery of the tongue, the loose woman, things like that. Because if you know the dangers, you can then identify it. It's much easier to pick it up. I cannot think back to any time when I was ever tempted by drugs. Simply because, or, smoking. In our family, it was just, if you do that, you're a loser. That's like totally stupid and wrong and worthless. So there was always a sense of, well, that's not for me. And, Proverbs 31 kind of treats alcohol that way, where it says, give it to him that's ready to perish, It's not for kings, O Lemuel. And not for princes. So if you teach our children that, this is so below you, you're so much better than this, I think that goes a long way. I don't really anticipate the drugs being a problem simply because even with my worldly upbringing, away from church, away from God, it was not something that ever tempted me. And I don't think it will be an issue for our children because it was just something that in my mind, well, that's just for losers. I never was tempted by that. So I think just teaching our kids, these are the dangers, this is what you watch out for. I think that's a great preventative. Has my husband written any books? He's thinking about writing one. Right, honey? So he's written the piano course, the Easy Church piano course. That's actually, it's like the little engine that could. It's very popular, and I think a lot of people are enjoying that. But no concrete plans for any other books at this time. What book besides the Gospel in the Bible captivates me the most? I really like Proverbs and Psalms. I don't know if that's because I read it the most often, because I read it to the children, or if I read it the most often because I find it the most captivating. But you know, I never tire of reading it. I find something new and really practical every single time I read it. And it's just really, you know, even if you only have a few quiet minutes in the morning, you will never walk away empty from that. So I find myself going back to that every single day, even if I don't have much time beyond that. That is it for tablet questions right now. Again, if you want to text in your question, text to 480-352-0616. I'm now going back to the computer stream. And it's saying due to high volume comment loading is disabled. Let me see if I can get back on here. Okay. If I missed your question in between, I'm sorry. I'm just going to try to find my spot back to where I was at. Did any of my children cry after a nap, refuse milk and all kinds of comfort, but not appear in pain and just keep crying and crying for no apparent reason? The child is 2 years old, thanks. It could be a number of things. It could have been that they slept on one of their limbs wrong, you know, like maybe their arm fell asleep when they lay on it, and then when they wake up it hurts. Sometimes they've gotten like their foot stuck in the rails of the toddler bed, or if you have a crib, they could probably get their foot stuck in there and it'd be uncomfortable. They might just be really thirsty or wake up. You know, sometimes we wake up from a nap and we're groggy and thirsty and have a headache. So that's probably it. I would just, you know, if they wake up from a nap and they're grumpy, I just tell them, oh, just lie down right here or come sit in my lap if I'm working on the computer or doing something else. And typically that takes care of it. If they're inconsolable, crying, a half hour goes by, I probably would then consider maybe they have an ear infection that got worse. Maybe they have a sore throat, and sometimes that gets worse when you nap. And of course, if they need medical attention, you know, you would want to take them to the doctor. But it might just be that they're uncomfortable from having taken a nap. Did my husband ever counterclaim against the Border Patrol police? Yeah, that's a good question. You would think so, right? Since they bashed in his car, broke his window, bashed in his head, and all that because he did nothing wrong. You would think he countersued. Well, he did try to, except that a judge just dismissed the case. You can't just sue whoever you like in this country. The court has to be willing to take your case. And since judges work for the government, the vast majority of the time, if you try to go after a government agency, the judge will simply dismiss your case and not let it go to trial. So that's exactly what happened. They have not been sued because the judge would not permit it to go to trial. And, you know, I would say I was upset about it at the time. My husband was not. I was. Simply because I wanted to see justice served. But ultimately, God will serve justice. It's not up to us to seek vengeance. And truly, if we were hoping for our judicial system to mete out justice, well, sadly, that's very unlikely to happen anymore these days. So no, nothing has ever happened in return. But I'm sure that God is keeping score. And you know, I honestly hope the people get saved. I hope they have a happy life. And we are over it, past it, and have put that behind us. Do I ever disagree with Stephen's fundamental views? So I'm guessing they're referring to my husband, Pastor Anderson. It's spelled with PH like my son. My son has some, but he has some pretty fundamental views for a 2-year-old. You know, like sometimes he's insisting he doesn't need a nap, and I do insist that he needs one. So, but I'm guessing this is talking about my husband. Do we disagree on things? You know, sometimes people think that him and I just like clones of one another and that we agree on everything. And by and large, we do agree on most things simply because we're right. And when you're right, you know, you kind of agree on the same thing. Do we sometimes disagree? Yes. Not on major fundamental issues. No, that's rare. You know, we draw our issues from the Bible, and the Bible is pretty straightforward in what it does and does not teach. So we do disagree on small things here and there. Have I read Escape from Camp 14? Yes, I have. I have read that. It was harrowing. Someone here says, I better not disagree with my husband. He's a spiritual leader. You know, there's a difference between being the spiritual leader and your wife disagreeing with you, because, see, the thing is, yes, he is the leader. That doesn't mean we always agree. It means that when our disagreement would affect our actions, we do the way that my husband wants it done, not the way I want it done. Say, for instance, we disagreed on what kind of books to let our children read. And I had an idea that I think thus and so the books are fine, and my husband has the opinion that no, he does not want his children reading those books. We are not agreeing, but of course I will submit and obey and say, well, the children will not read those books. So we can disagree without his leadership being called into question and the fact that he's the head. Okay, let's see here. Listening to the audio Bible, is it the same as reading the Bible? I think it can be. I think it depends on the person. I have a tendency to tune it out. So even though I do listen to a lot of the audio Bible, I don't count that as my Bible reading. There are other people who have a great attention span and they don't start tuning it out, and they're comfortable. The Bible says, blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy. And you know, just like we read to our children and they can learn greatly from that, they don't have to read it physically themselves. I think you can listen to it and it'd be just as effective as reading the Bible. But I think there's a danger there, so it just depends on the individual of tuning it out and maybe it's just becoming more of a background sound. It says, guys, I'm currently backsliding and I wonder why I'm not getting chastised. I'm saved by grace, but not getting chastisement is making me doubt my salvation. Well, be sure your sin will find you out. You know, the pleasure will be there for a season and eventually it will catch up with you. It's the law of sowing and reaping. You might still be sowing and you might not be in the reaping phase yet. So just because it hasn't come yet, eventually it will come. You know, God is just very long-suffering toward us, and he's just extending grace and mercy. And don't let that fool you into going down that slippery slope. So I would admonish you to get back on the right track. Okay, I'm going to take a break from this live stream, and I will take another question that was submitted earlier through here. The ZS in Hungarian, like the ch in English, is it a similar type of digraph? No, the ZS in my name, so it's ZSU, ZSA, NNA. The ZS makes the Z sound. We have it in English in the word vision. So my name, Zsuzsanna, Z. It's not like the ch in English. It's a Z. What advice would I give to a married lady with several kids who realized through studying the Bible and listening to Bible preaching that she's in a Christian cult for decades and can't support the cult anymore and wants to leave if the husband demands that she should obey him and stay? Well, this is a very general question. Sometimes what people call a cult is not really a cult. For example, we are often called a cult, and we're not a cult. We simply believe the Bible. For something to be a cult, it would have to center around a person. That's what defines a cult, is that rather than following the Bible, it follows a person. By that standard, I consider the Roman Catholic Church a cult. It is not based on the Bible, and it follows a man. Now, there are definitely cults that I've heard about. in the fundamentalist Christian or even calling themselves Baptist community. Like there's this guy, Joey Faust, I think is his name. He used to be in Texas, but now he moved his compound out into the sticks. And yeah, I would consider that a cult. So the first thing I would say is, well, it might not be a cult just because some people call it a cult. And if you're sure that it is a cult, well, you know, you swore an oath to your husband, for better or for worse. And short of you being in danger of physical harm, I mean like serious physical harm, or your children, you just have to, you know, you made your bed, you lay in it. I mean, that's when we get married, we have to realize it's for better, for worse. It's for life. And yes, you are commanded to obey your husband. I think the only time that you would get a pass on that is if you are either in disobedience to God, egregiously. I mean, you can still, if you're in a cult, and like say there are ladies who they are saved, but their husband wants them to go to Catholic Church. Should they do that? Well, you know, I don't want to advise you in either way on that, because on the one hand, you want to obey your husband. You can still, if he lets you, as long as you go to the Catholic Church. I would, in any one of these situations, I would always try to make peace with the husband, try to make supplication and have him come your way. Very, very, very few men are just hell-bent on making their wife's life misery. And if you are willing to go his way and be respectful and be submissive, they will almost always accommodate. So, you know, a lady maybe has a husband who says, I don't want you going to thus and so the church, or I want you to go to this and that, the Presbyterian or some other apostate church with me. You know, if he still lets you go to your own church, or if he still lets you worship God and read your Bible and do things, you know, try at all costs to avoid the conflict and obey your husband. And just pray to God that he will soften your husband's heart, help him see the truth. I'm sorry, really, this question is a little too generalized for me to be able to give a better opinion on this. Last question from this piece of paper. Given the controversial nature of some of my husband's preaching, do I ever feel threatened, or do you really feel like God has your back? Yes, I 100% of the time feel like God has our back. I don't feel threatened. I know that some threats come through. I think that the vast majority of them are idle threats. And the ones that are not, I really don't even one time ever lay awake at night thinking, what if this were coming true? I am certain that God has our back. And if God can't protect us, there's nothing we can do. The Bible says the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. So we prepare our horse, as it were. You know, we take measures to ensure our personal safety. Whether that be handguns, you know, in Arizona we have concealed carry and just open carry. That's wonderful. I feel very safe at church just because so many of our people, because we're in Arizona, they just open carry or concealed carry. Anybody who would want to come in here would be a fool, because our people are very well armed and ready to defend themselves or others. We have home defense, but it's not any of that that's making me feel safe. I feel safe because I know that my husband is preaching the truth, that it's unpopular, that it's touching a nerve. That's why it brings out the haters, but that just proves that it's the truth. If he were teaching another lie, you know, people wouldn't be up on the barricades. People aren't on the barricades about, you know, trying to disprove Islam or things like that. So, yeah, he must be doing something right, so I'm certain that God is protecting us. I will go back to the tablet here. I hope everybody's enjoying this. I hope I'm not going too fast, and I hope you can hear me okay. Great questions so far, and thank you for tuning in. I really do enjoy doing these. We have about 10-15 minutes left. Do I allow my children to use iTunes for podcasts, movies, or books? No, I've never even really thought about it. The only things that our kids watch, as it were, on the screen is I get the Pioneer Woman episodes and the Duggar episodes on Amazon Prime, so they can watch those on the computer. And no, they've not really. Sometimes on Amazon Prime there's like non-fiction stuff they like to watch that we tie in with their schoolwork. So no iTunes for them, but they haven't really asked me, so it hasn't been an issue. I recently started holding the Bible as final these past few months. How can I make my wife obey me after not doing it for so long? Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? You know, I think great leadership will always command great followers. So I think, I don't know, because I'm not the husband, so I can't give advice on that. But I would say that just by being a great leader, your wife will want to follow you. Women do naturally have a tendency to want to follow their husband's lead and to want to obey. And in fact, much more often than men asking, how do I get my wife to obey me? I hear ladies asking, how do I get my husband to be the leader? Like, he just is happy to just let me do my thing, and he never tells me what to do, so I don't really have an opportunity to, you know, do what he says. So I would say just, you know, be a good leader. And what that entails, I'm not a leader, so you wouldn't be wanting to get my advice on that, but, you know, I think that if you fulfill your role, she will do greatly towards her role. Last question here, and then I'm going to go back to the live stream. In submission, should a woman have marital relations with her husband every time he wants to, even if it is multiple times a day? Unequivocally, yes. I think one of the best things you can do for your marriage is to be available to your husband anytime. And your husband can get all his physical needs met, just about all his physical needs met by anybody besides you if he had to. He can go out to eat at a restaurant if he's hungry. He can buy himself clothes if he needs clothes. He can take care of all those things. The one need in the world that only you as the wife can meet is that. And there's great danger in turning him down for that, because it has to be met. That desire has to be there, or Satan will tempt him. And yes. Now, you're saying here multiple times a day. I hear you, because you probably have kids and you probably have a lot going on in your life. I would venture to guess that if you said yes to him every time for just some period of time, that would probably scale back to where it wouldn't just be multiple times every day. I don't know that that's I mean, unless you're newlyweds, and, you know, then that might be an ongoing thing for several months. But if you've been married for an extended period of time, it probably would not go on like that forever. But if it does, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really take that long. And I would say the goal definitely should be yes, 100% of the time, for the man or the woman. I know it's less common of a problem, but there are men who are not willing to be available to their wife as often, and that's also wrong. It goes both ways. The Bible makes it very clear that both the husband and the wife have not power of their own body, but that they need to yield to the other person in that area. And I said I would go back to the live stream. Oops, there goes the tablet. I have to reload because it keeps Xing me out. It's saying the volume is too great. I'm waiting for it to load. Okay, well, while I'm waiting for this to load, I will take another question from the paper. Do I teach German to my children? I'm sorry, how do I teach German to my children? The best resources I've found are language materials in Germany themselves. I'm not really impressed with foreign language material that is available in the United States, which I guess makes sense in light of the fact that few Americans speak a foreign language. So the materials that I like to use are German as a foreign language materials, like English as a second language. Well, there's German as a second language materials available in Germany for children, and those are the things I like to use. They're basically made for, they're actually made for foreigners, like, say, a lot of immigrants to Germany that don't speak German, and then they have to learn it in school, so they make these materials for them. That's what my kids are using, and very successful with that. So my live stream is up now, so I will skip over to this here. Hungarian Germans suffered greatly during World War II. Do I have any family that went through the suffering? I know that the revolution, when the Russians came in 1956, greatly affected many people, including in my own family. I know that my grandpa, my German grandpa, was taken prisoner in a Russian prison camp, and he was actually shipped like in cattle cars across the entire country of Russia at that time, and many people who were with him did not survive. He did. He wrote his memoirs, and my aunt gave me a copy of them. They're in German. I've wanted to translate them and publish them on my blog in stages. Fascinating story. But for my Hungarian side, I've not heard anything in specific. But then again, I last saw my grandparents when I was a child, and I should ask my dad. He would probably know. But I know that they were affected when the Russians came in 1956. I want to homeschool, and my daughter is 3.5 right now. We have been unable to conceive again. Do you know anyone with one child they homeschool? Nobody I know here has only one child. Yes, I do know multiple people with one child that they homeschool. And I'm guessing the concern there is, would they be socialized enough? And, you know, I would just make sure that your child is with you throughout the day. Their socialization is not just coming from their siblings. It's coming from interacting with other adults that you come into contact with in daily life. You can go to homeschool co-ops. There's often, or you can sign them up for a team, or PE, drama classes, piano. There's such a plethora of resources available in most areas that the danger is not that they won't be socialized enough. The danger is that you will get them involved in too many things and not be home enough. So yeah, I definitely would recommend you homeschool, even if there's only one child, and that can be done very successfully. Have I read the book Nourishing Traditions? Yes, I have. And yes, I'm aware of the gut and psychology syndrome, the GAPS diet that goes with that. So yes, I'm fully aware of that. And I actually know people in real life that have healed many of their food allergies with the GAPS diet. So I definitely always recommend that when people have severe food allergies, which I don't have any, I always recommend that. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing anything here. Have I ever been in Czech Republic since I was in Germany? I actually have family right now in the Czech Republic. My German grandpa, that part of Czech Republic used to be part of Germany. So my German grandpa, his sister lived there, and then all her children and their children. So I've been there multiple times and visited them. And they live in, where do they live? Pilsen? No, I don't know. I'm not sure now. I can't remember. There are some questions on here from my husband, so I'm going to skip over those. I like this one. Does he consider the Confederate flag racist? No, he doesn't. I don't know if that's a joke or something. So I'm going to go back to the tablet. Your best chance of getting a question answered is if you text it to me at 480-352-0616. 480-352-0616. And I have 3 new questions. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. I am wrong. No new questions. Okay, so let me go back to the paper here. This is a sad question. It really broke my heart for this lady. She emailed me in more detail. What do you do if your husband insists you have to work to supplement the family income because he works for a Christian friend who pays him below minimum wage, especially if your heart's desire is to be a keeper at home, as the Bible says? And in the email, she had mentioned that the job she is doing is very physically active. She works a shift job, and it's very physically demanding, and she dreads the job. And, you know, my heart breaks for you. It's very sad, a very sad situation to be in. There's a lot of things, of course, wrong in this situation. let's talk about the Christian friend who pays below minimum wage. Well, that's not very Christian at all. We as Christians should be careful to pay our employees a fair, livable wage. It's not for us to just make them skimp by on a meager income. I think that paying people a livable wage is very important and Christ-like. If your husband is working for him for little money, that's a poor decision. Of course, I don't know his reasons behind it. It is his responsibility to pay the bills. If he wants to work for his Christian friend because maybe he has ideals that he wants to support, or maybe this Christian friend is trying to get something great off the ground and he wants to help him to be noble, well, it's still his job to provide, so he would have to get a second job rather than asking you to take that second job. Of course, it is his job to do so. With all that being said, you are his wife, not his mother. And unfortunately, you can't force him to do anything. And the question comes up often, should I disobey my husband and refuse to go to work? Or should I obey my husband and go to work when the Bible says not to? And I always say you need to obey your husband because the Bible does not specifically tell women not to have a job outside the home. Of course, it tells us that if we're wise and if we want to have great success in child rearing and if we want to avoid falling into the snare of the devil, we as ladies should stay home and be a full-time wife or a full-time mother. But it does not specifically forbid us from going to work. It's not a good choice, but it's not a sin inherently. So if your husband says you must go to work, you know you have to go to work. And that's very sad and unfortunate. And then my recommendation is to say you need to appeal to the higher power, which is God. Just fast and pray that God would change your husband's heart, and if he doesn't, to give you the strength to do what you have to do. And I'm very sorry, that's a very unfortunate situation to be in. And to those who come after, your children, other young ladies, as hard as it is for you to swallow that bitter pill, at least they are learning before they get married, this is something important to settle before I get married. The talk of, am I going to work? Will you support the family? What will be the child care arrangement? Will I be able to stay home? Will I be able to homeschool? Will I be forced to, limit the amount of children I have? Those are all things that should be settled ahead of time, before the vows are said. Because once those vows are said, that's just it. You have now sworn before God, and you have to live with that decision. It is who you marry is the most important decision of your life, short of getting saved, of course. And I would say that just like you are grieved that you are forced to work, there are other guys who are struggling because their wife wants to go pursue a career, or their wife does not want to have children. Their wife is refusing to obey and homeschool or whatever. These are conversations that need to be nailed down before people are getting married. And maybe better than just talking about it is to just look for some real hard and fast evidence. If you are, for example, we had a young couple that got married in our church, and I think it was a wonderful, beautiful wedding. And I think it was very thoughtful and considerate and also wise of the groom that when he got engaged, he told his wife, honey, I don't want you working anymore. I will support you full-time even before we're married. And they lived in two separate states. He was working out of state at the time. But he took on full financial responsibility even for her as she was a fiancée. That's some hard and fast evidence that she can look at and see, he's a hard worker. He will provide. So I think that some things that men should look out for before getting married is she willing to give up her job before she gets married? If you want her to not work after she's married, you want to probably nail that down before you get married, because she might otherwise just after she's married say, well, actually I do want to continue my career. I actually don't want to stay home. I actually don't want to have kids. I just, want to pursue my career, and you're going to pay for college. So for the guy, I would say, if there are decisions that are near and dear to your heart, you know, see some of that before you get married. And to the lady, I would say, if he's not financially stable or responsible, and I'm not saying he has to have some big fat bank account or be padded, he just needs to show that he's financially responsible, that he can be wise with money and make good decisions, that he's a hard worker. Those are things you want to look for in a man. And if he's none of those things before you get married, he will not change. At least that's what you should tell yourself. I mean, he might change, and that would be great. But as far as getting married, you know, just assume you're marrying the finished product. And if you don't like it now, you're not going to like it anymore after the vows are said. Because then people are even less motivated. You know, once the vows are said and you're locked in, there's even less motivation for people to change. So if you don't like it before you get married, you know, you don't fool yourself into thinking you're going to change them. Okay, that was, I only have one more question on here. Actually two, so let me finish these off on the paper real quick and then I will do the tablet. I've been trying to be more modest and not wearing jeans anymore. What do you consider modest? If it is right above my knee or in the middle of my knees, is that considered modest? What is appropriate for tops? How much should we cover up? Thanks and God bless. If you're married, you know, definitely you want to dress in a way that your husband is comfortable with you leaving the house. There could be something that is technically, biblically considered modest, but that your husband is not comfortable with, that of course you want to accommodate him. Personally, I like to be covered neck to knee. If that's the top of the knee or the bottom, I think it is, I think biblically speaking, just to the knee, which would be to the top of the knee. If that's covered, that is fine. And personally, I go mid-calf simply because when I sit down, when I maybe have to bend down, things like that, I don't want to have to constantly worry about if I'm just, you know, flashing the world. But technically, I would say anything that goes to the knee is perfectly fine. That was what expected of the priests in the Old Testament, and their breeches were supposed to come to the knee, covering their thigh. And of course, they were physically active. So if a guy wears shorts that go down to the top of the knee, but then they're active, you know, it's inevitable they're going to slide down. God knew that, so he must be okay with that. Or else he would have told them it has to be, you know, to the calf or something like that. For tops, you know, it's good to go back to the word modest because you basically don't want to be flashy. I think something could be completely covering you, but be so flashy and gaudy that it's a lot more attention-grabbing than, say, a plain top that has maybe a neckline that goes below the collarbone. I know some people have the collarbone as their measuring stick. So again, I think there's a lot of room there. What I consider modest might not be what someone else's is. Definitely err on the side of covering up if that's the question, but you don't want to stand out as being just like wearing a turtleneck in the height of summer in Arizona or something. That will draw more attention. And last question on here. I saw your post about the swim clothes. Will you be putting designs out for adult sizes too? Yes, I will. I'm actually almost ready to ship. But it was kind of just like this late idea that I had one night, oh, I should sell those. And then realizing that selling stuff online, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of opening an online store and taking payment and the shipping, you know, it sounds so easy in theory, like, oh, sure, you give me money and I give you this pattern. And then you get down to the nitty-gritty of it. So I'm working on it. There will be an adult pattern, and I'm hoping to be out with it in the next few days. So, yeah, just bear with me. My family wants to keep eating. It's amazing. They want 3 square meals a day and laundry and school and everything. So I'm going a little bit slower than I was hoping to go. But I should have it out within a week at the very latest, although I would like to have it out before the end of the weekend. And all those people that are helping me with it are listening, and they're probably laughing right now. Many people are helping me with it. I have 2 questions on here. I'm a believer who struggles with pornography. Do you believe God will prevent me from having a wife if I do not stop? Yeah, definitely a possibility. I definitely think God will punish you if you're clearly not married, you know. And you might think you're not harming anybody, but you're harming your future marriage greatly. And you are doing great harm to your marriage, and if you're harming your marriage, you're also harming your children. And I would very strongly advise you, the Bible says, you should pluck out your eyes rather than, it would be better to lose that eye than to lust after women wrongfully. So you need to do what it takes. If it means ripping your computer and tearing it out and throwing it away, then do that. If you need to downgrade your phone to a little, one of those little phones that are just a phone, not the screen. If it means canceling the internet, I think the vast majority of porn comes through the internet, so cancel your service. Do what it takes. Break that habit. Give yourself accountability. If you are a Christian, God will not look lightly on that, and you will reap the consequences of your actions. Your wife will suffer. Your marriage will suffer. You will suffer. And very, very dangerous. You want to get off that road before you follow down anymore. And you will not have the wisdom to choose the right kind of wife. The Bible says a prudent wife is from the Lord. God will not reward you with that, but you also will not have just the wisdom to say, well, I'll just find one on my own. You will be looking for all the wrong things. If nothing else, you will be basing your decision just on physical appearances more than you should probably, and not on the character qualities and the Christian aspect of this lady. And you will have a very sad life if you do not give up this addiction. And then my husband is considering going back into the military to support our family, so I don't have to work anymore. What are your views on serving in the military now that our country has become so corrupt? I would not advise any Christian to join the military. Our military is the spearhead of the one world government, and it seeks to enslave the world. And I'm not saying that every military member is wicked or evil. Far from it. But we shouldn't participate in a wicked, corrupt system that is seeking to enslave the world and bring about the end times and prop up the Antichrist. We do not have to participate in that. I would not advise any Christian to join the military. And if you can get out of the military, I would very strongly encourage you to do so. It's kind of like there's a lot of great people that might have been part of the of various armies. You think of the Russian armies and the Russian government in World War II and how wicked they were and how they killed just millions of their own people. Does that mean every Russian soldier was a bad person? Of course not. I'm certain that the vast majority of them were not. But by working for a corrupt, evil government, they enabled those few wicked people that are in leadership to fulfill their wicked goals. And of course, they also got a snare to their own soul and might, in the process of working for them, become wicked themselves. I think many people want to join the military or the police force or things like that, and they're well-intentioned and they might have noble goals, but by being caught up in this wicked system, they themselves will be corrupted, or else they will just be grieved every day as they work for them. So you just need to trust that God will provide. And then let's take a few more questions. I'm getting ready to wind down here. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, it is 3:12. So I would say that I should wind this down in the next 5 minutes. So honey, if you want to help me turn this down in the next 5 minutes, if you could, please. I will, until he is here to be able to help me with that, just take questions from the live stream and the text. Again, if you want to text, that's 480-352-0616. And just time for a few more questions until technical support arrives. Let me see here. This thing is messing up. Oh, and here is my computer. Let me find one last question, and then we will call it a day. All right. Okay, I'm a teen. And when I told my parents, they said not to listen to you anymore, but I disobeyed and got saved. Am I in sin for disobeying my parents? You're not in sin for getting saved or reading the Bible or listening to preaching. But again, as with the advice for the wife and the husband, try to live at peace with your parents. I'm sure if your parents see you be a more obedient, a more submissive child, more helpful around the house, polite, courteous, hardworking, and they can make the connection that it's because you fear God and keep His commandments and because you're reading the Bible, I think that they will be all in support of you seeking after God. So if at all possible, try to avoid any conflict. And, when push comes to shove, we ought to obey God rather than men. But ideally, we want to avoid, we want to line our authorities up all in the same line rather than having to choose which one we're going to obey. So I believe it's possible if you have a heart that wants to reconcile all your authorities, that God will bless that and help you. Anyway, that is it for today. I hope you had fun. I have no more questions in front of me, and we will be doing this again soon. Thank you so much for tuning in.